August 27, 2014, the date of the first anniversary of the launch of A Realm Reborn. In canon, this was of course represented as the first Rising event, marking 5 years in Eorzea since the 7th Umbral Calamity. Throughout August and September of 2014, a 5-part series of short stories titled Tales from the Calamity was released, expounding on the experiences of several key characters in the aftermath of the Battle of Cartano, which precipitated this calamity. Now, almost 6 years later, we're going to take the opportunity to revisit these stories, followed by Tales from the Dragonsong War, Tales from the Storm, and Tales from the Shadows. First off the rack then, this is Tales from the Calamity Part 1, where victory and glory lead. First published on August 15, 2014. We are lost, thought Merlwood Blofusveen. Immured for eons and free at last, the primal Bahamut laid waste the Cartano flats, burning Eorzeans and Garleans alike. But I will find a way. Tearing her gaze away from the bloody churn, she bit gently on her tongue, an old commander's trick, and despite the ash-laden air, the voice that issued from her throat was as clear as compass wind. Belay previous orders. All Maelstrom units are commanded to fall back, effective immediately. In the distance, the Admiral caught a glimpse of Archon Louis Soir's resolute silhouette, arms raised in the rite of summoning. Not even the 12 can help us now, she thought with something like despair as she swung herself into the saddle. Dalamud has hatched, and no man can unbreak an egg. Give the foreign levy priority. Let the main host cover their retreat and bring up the rear. Einzar Slafierson let go the bridle as Merlwood took hold of the reins. A shard of the false moon had pierced the mail under his right arm, she saw. Blood reeled, dark and steady. Her adjutant would likely not survive a hard ride. Get those adventurers to safety, she repeated. I shall send you stragglers. We must regroup. See to it. At once, Admiral. Einzar snapped a salute. He knows me too well to waste time arguing, Merlwood reflected as she urged her faithful bird to a gallop. And he knows most of our runners are dead or near as damn it. A sharp queh brought her back to the present. Good girl, Vicky, she murmured as the chocobo sped onward through a blur of death and ruin. Fall back! Fall back to the main host! Merlwood called again and again until the route became a stream, then a river, flowing towards Einzar and, she hoped, safety. But there was a knot in the crowd, fighting its way against the tide until it emerged at the rear, then pushing on towards the Garlean position. Always, Merlwood thought without rancor, and spurred her chocobo forward. Always there are those who put glory before victory. Save your breath, Admiral. I mean to make those Garlean curs pay, and pay they will. Roswin spat, and Merlwood was reminded of the old saying, pirates weep with their swords, and their tears are red. So many sirens. Spleeny Ebro won't sing no more, nor Anus Blackeye, nor there you are, you liverless tin-pot bastards! A savage joy blazed in Roswin's eyes at the sight of something behind Merlwood, and the Maelstrom commander touched her spur to Victory's left flank and she unholstered her pistols in one smooth motion. Death penalty barked and a Garlean legionnaire tumbled backwards. 2 sharp coughs from Annihilator and more men fell, to reveal the beetle-black gleam of Magitech armor cresting the rise. It has a beak, Merlwood thought with strange calm, her legs squeezing Victory's flanks of their own accord. The chocobo sprang as the Magitech cannon roared. Then Merlwood was falling, the world drowning in blood and feathers, and she knew no more. The most rest you've had in years, I'll wager. Merlwood awoke to a familiar sight, her quarters on the Triumph, and Einzar, his face graven with fatigue, but alive and on his feet. How long? She demanded. Present course and speed? 2 days, Limsa, 8 knots, he answered. The Alliance regrouped in Thanalan, where the alchemists saw to our hurts. They meant to keep you abed in Uldar, but I assured them that would not be necessary. We are crossing the Strait of Melthor for home. The sirens? Roswin? Einzar laughed. Merlwood could almost hear the rust in it. Command, especially the command of a retreating force, was a somber business. The bloody executioners hauled you from the front like pullers with a bulging net, but they had no luck coaxing Captain Roswin to join the retreat. Then came the last of the dread pirate crews 3, the Kraken's Arms. and Carver Yane swept her up onto the saddle like a bloody knight of Ishgard. Last I saw, they were trading curses. Good. Moab willed her eyes to stay open. She was suddenly very tired, and could not bring to mind the names of the others who had been present. No matter, Einzar would know. The retreat from Cartano. I ordered a unit be given priority. Did you get them to safety? Einzar looked at her, his brow furrowed. Beg pardon, Admiral. My orders were to bring up the rear as the main host retreated, gathering any stragglers you directed towards us, then begin regrouping. You did not order that any be given priority over another. The coming days were too full for Merweb or Einzar to fret overmuch about her odd lapse. She had taken a blow to her head after all, and it was a trifle compared to what awaited them in Vilbrand. As the Triumph neared home, they saw livid crystals bursting from Faris Sirius, flaunting their corruption for all to see. Galadian Bay was a floating Cartano, the sea strewn with bodies, debris, and hollow-eyed survivors of the tidal wave that had scoured the coastline. Einzar was lucky, Melwood thought as she surveyed the destruction. What size these shards to make an eighth hell of this fair anchorage? And what of we who have been spared? How can we go on when so much has been lost? I will find a way. Melweb ordered that the Maelstrom's temporary command be established at the Morrowby dry docks, sheltered from the worst of the Great Wave by the God's grip. From there, the remains of Limsa Lominsa's great armada sailed with food and supplies, aid and succor, women of strength and men of compassion. Admiral Merweb slept little, but when she did, it was always one of two dreams that she dreamed. In one, she bit down on her tongue, then called out, "Give them priority, let the main host cover their retreat." In the other, she rode a destrier into the cool night, the bird crooning contentedly and the rider murmuring, "Good girl, Vicky." Time passed. Some wounds healed, others did not. The fishing boats returned to sea, and the merchants stowed oars and cut purses to the docks. The new Maelstrom command took shape on the upper decks, the ships of the Armada returned to their proper anchorage, and the Morrowby dry docks were recommissioned as a shipyard. During those turbulent days, those who knew Merwood best, and there were not many, remarked that she had been changed by Cartano. To the scores that came to the Admiral for help, she gave no false comfort, but neither was she as hard as once she had been. She spoke instead of hope, courage, and the lost warriors who stood with the Archon on the Cartano Flats. For this, Merweb won the love of her people, yet struggled to accept it. So unsettling did the thought seem to her that one night, unable to sleep, she wandered the city, finding herself at length outside an Ishgardian stable, as young birds murmured drowsily within. When Naldic and Vermelis began work on the first of the Thalassocracy's new warships, there was no question as to whom the honor of naming it would go. One fine day soon after, half the city turned out to see the Victory's keel laid. When the Admiral of Limsa Lominsa inscribed her name upon the oak with a great flourish, the cheers rolled like thunder across the tranquil waters of Galadian Bay and set the gulls and ravens flapping from every mast. So there is the first of the tales from the Calamity, expounding on the experiences of Merweb during the Battle of Cartano and its aftermath. There has unfortunately been very little focus or development of Merweb's character since this time, particularly when you compare her to her counterparts in Uldar. What I would like to do now, and what I would like to get out of these episodes, is rather than merely retelling these stories for you, that we can spend some time discussing and elaborating on the relevant lore content, both in the context of where we were and what we knew at the time, as well as whatever salient details we might be privy to now, nearly 6 years later. Patrons and Twitch subs, you guys will have early access to these episodes as soon as they're ready via the sub and patron channels on the Discord. So let me know what you think of this structure and we can revise it as we go. So let's start with Merweb. The Lady Blofusveen first appeared on the radar of Eorzean history 16 years before the Calamity as a member of the pirate crew the League of Lost Bastards, captained by her father Blofusin. She basically discovered that he had been conspiring with the Sahagins, with whom Limsa was presently at war, and so challenged him to a duel, executing him with a musket, which she subsequently named Death Penalty. Merweb's muskets, Death Penalty and Annihilator, are of course referenced in the story. They are generally believed to have once belonged to the dread pirate Mistbeard, but we'll come to him in a moment. After executing her father, Merweb took command of the League of Lost Bastards and soon departed on an expedition to the great western continent we know of as the New World, which had been discovered about 60 years prior by Ketanram the Blue, but most attempts since that time had ended in complete disaster, since no safe course had been successfully charted until Merweb's first expedition in 1555, returning 1556. She commanded a second expedition just a few years later, this time at the head of an armada which established trade relations with the Mammal Jar nations, which have, as far as we know, remained steady ever since. Merweb only ascended the Admiralty after a power vacuum was created in 1562, when then commander of the Knights of the Barracuda, Limsa's state navy before the formation of the Maelstrom, so their commander, Thalman Thalmanson, assassinated the incumbent admiral in an attempted coup manipulated by the Asian Travanchet, by whom he was ultimately betrayed and failed to seize the Admiralty, instead dishonorably discharged. This plotline is of course experienced as the Echo Vision, which constitutes the first chapter of the 1.0 MSQ for players starting in Limsa. We now know Thalman by the name Rostenthal, the disgraced Leminson marksmanship expert of the Machinist questline. Merweb led her crew in victory of the Trident the following year, the Trident being a nautical death race style competition which was traditionally used to determine a new admiral every 7 years. Okay, let's steer it back to the tale. As I mentioned, this first tale was published on August 15, 2014, which places it squarely in patch 2.3, Defenders of Eorzea. This was a really significant time to be talking about Cartano, as although we now knew about Bahamut's pending regeneration, had just defeated Nell Vandanis in second coil, and both seen and heard Louis Soir creeping around down there, we didn't yet know the full truth of the Calamity, of Louis Soir's role of Phoenix, and we wouldn't until 2.4, and the second part of the Answers cinematic revealed in final coil. Something that had just happened in 2.3, however, was Hullbreaker Isle, where we learned the long-rumoured truth of Einzar Slafirson, Grand Storm Marshal, whom features heavily in this first tale. The short story there is that Mistbeard had been a mythical pirate king, believed immortal for centuries due to his iconic mask being passed down captain to captain, before the final Mistbeard, Einzar, had been convinced by Merweb to give it up, hiding the mask along with his treasure and his flagship, the Har, on the perpetually fog-shrouded Hullbreaker Isle, and becoming effectively her Raubon. This was a huge part of Merweb's success in priming Limsa for the outlaw of piracy against all but Garlean targets, the Galadian Accord. This was a policy that, unsurprisingly, earned her a number of assassination attempts, and it's something we'll dive into in a little more detail in just a bit. So in 2.3, we had also started recruiting for Alphino's ill-fated Crystal Braves, and in this process approached both Captains Roswin and Carviane, neither of whom had really featured in the MSQ for non-Limsa starters before now. The three most powerful pirate fleets in contemporary Limsa are the Bloody Executioners, the Kraken's Arms, and the Sanguine Sirens. Roswin is captain of the latter, a female-dominated crew established by female mercenaries trying to basically carve their own slice out of this male-dominated pirate world. She and Carviane have an interesting relationship with this extreme public animosity, but quite a few allusions to suppressed feelings and stolen glances here and there. Einzar makes a reference in the tale to Carviane rescuing Roswin during the retreat at Cartano by sweeping her up into his saddle like a bloody knight of Ishgard, which is very much tongue-in-cheek, knowing what we know of Carviane, which is that this is basically what he is. Carviane de Gorgain was actually born Carviane de Durender, heir to the Ishgardian house Durandare, which makes him the older brother of Janequinard of the Astrologian storyline. He ran away from home at 14 and signed onto a vessel which was raided by the Kraken's arms, into which he gladly enlisted and eventually rose through the ranks to become their captain. His family back in Ishgard is obviously oblivious to all of this, but Tataru was able to piece it together during her time in the Holy See and uses this information to blackmail Carviane to take us to Kugane in Stormblood. So even after Merlwyb had convinced these two to sign the Galadian Accord, there was a holdout in the form of the most powerful of all Limsa's crews, the Bloody Executioners, captained by one-eyed Hilfir Facemonson. He now enjoys a kind of soft retirement at 70-something in his permanently docked flagship, the Astalicia, but he was the greatest threat to Merlwyb's rule and to the Galadian Accord until one of her allies conspired to assassinate him, resulting in the slaughter of an entire crew of both the Barracudas and Bloody Executioners, leaving only Merlwyb and Hilfir standing, where she gave him the ultimatum basically to submit or die. This event was covered up, Hilfir signed the accord, and Merlwyb basically leaves him to his own devices now, provided he stays out of her way. I mention all this because the fact that it was his crew, the Bloody Executioners, who rescued Merlwyb after she fell at Cartano, despite the fact that they had wanted her dead and replaced with Hilfir earlier that same year, really speaks volumes to her character as having become this unifying leader for all of these disparate pirate factions. Now, the piece of legislation which empowers her leadership and keeps her in the Admiral's chair despite being well past her 7-year term is, of course, the Galadian Accord, decreeing the outlaw of pirate activity against all targets except the Garleans, to be held in effect only so long as the Garlean threat persists. When we inevitably defeat or reform Garlemald, the Accord will be rendered null and void, and I think it'll be extremely interesting to see what happens in Limsa and what progression of Merlwyb's character might come at that time. Now, we could talk about Merlwyb all day, but for now I want to focus back on what we have left in this first tale. We know that after the Calamity, no one could precisely remember the Warriors of Light. Neither Merlwyb nor Ainzar remembered the order to give priority to the Foreign Levy during the retreat. And the Foreign Levy is, of course, the Maelstrom unit of mercenary adventurers commanded by Rashad Riki, to whom the Warrior of Light would have been assigned. Merlwyb wakes up as the Triumph crosses the Strait of Merl Thor to home, quite ironically. The Strait of Merl Thor is, of course, the stretch of water between Vilbrand and the west coast of Aldenard, specifically Thanlin, Mordona, and Yefayam. When you're standing at Horizon's Edge or outside of the Waking Sand and looking across the water, that is the Strait of Merl Thor that you're looking across. Merlwyb also notes the corruption of Faris Sirius, to which she really should be far more incredulous, as Faris Sirius didn't even exist before the Calamity. It was never seen, never mentioned anywhere before 2.0, and so it stands as one of the more obvious post-1.x retcons. Finally, Vicky, or Victory, was the name of Merlwyb's destrier, a large breed of chocobo, whom evidently did not survive Cartano, and whose death Merlwyb felt most keenly, giving her name to the first of the Maelstrom's new warships built at Morrowby Dry Docks. This final scene actually takes place during the final quest for the Limsa Start first MSQ chapter at level 14 in A Realm Reborn. You can find the Victory still aground at the dry docks, where Naldic and Vermelis perpetually completes the final touches trapped within the ARR time bubble. So that's about it for Tales from the Calamity Part 1, where Victory and Glory lead. Next up will be Part 2, of course, the Sultana 7. I have several of these tales recorded already, and I'll be getting onto the discussions very soon. Patrons and Twitch subs, as I mentioned, will have access to these as soon as they're ready via the respective Discord channels, and from there they will trickle into the YouTube public over the following weeks and months. So thank you so much to you patrons and subs for making this possible. We have some rebranding and glow up in the works for both here and Twitch, which should be in effect not long after this part is published, so I hope you enjoy all of that. Subscribe for more lore content here if you haven't already, and feel free to drop me a follow over on Twitch and Twitter while you're at it. Until next time, take care, stay safe, And thank you all so much for listening.